I can fill in a 2-column proof to prove 2 triangles congruent. There's a few things we're going to look at and review here. The first is understanding the markings on the figure. So anytime you're trying to use one of these 4 theorems here, you have to actually have pieces of evidence. So you have to know that you have a pair of sides are congruent or a pair of angles is congruent in order to use them. One way that you'll be given that information is it'll be marked directly on the figure. So for example, if we look at these 2 triangles here, I have a pair of arc marks. That means that that is a pair of congruent angles. So that means this angle on this triangle is congruent to this angle on this triangle. So that counts as a pair of congruent angles. Also, I have a tick mark on this side and a tick mark on this side. So that means this side of the triangle is congruent to this side on its corresponding triangle. So that counts as a pair of congruent sides. Now, I can't just randomly add more markings. So even though you might think that this angle up here and this angle down here are congruent, you're not allowed to mark it unless you have some sort of reason. And we have a list of reasons that you can use in our learning log. One of those reasons is vertical angles, because one thing we've learned this year is that vertical angles, no matter what, are always congruent. So I am allowed to add another pair of arc marks here to add a second pair of congruent angles, and that reason is vertical angles. That justifies those markings. With this pair of triangles, there's nothing else that I'm allowed to mark or say that is congruent, no matter how congruent it may look. So based on these 3 pieces of information, the side is included in between these 2 angles. So I could say that these 2 triangles are congruent by angle, side, angle. Looking at these 2 triangles here, again, looking at the markings given to us, we've got 2 tick marks here and 2 tick marks here. So we know we have a pair of corresponding congruent sides. Although there's only one right angle over here, we know that these 2 angles will be supplementary, so we could figure out that that one's also going to be a right angle. So that counts as a pair of congruent angles. And then the other thing that we can mark is this shared side. A shared side, that is the reflexive property. Anytime you have a shared side, that does count. That is something that you can add, because we know for sure that this side will be congruent on the left triangle and it will be the same length on the right triangle because it's the exact same size. Again, we cannot mark anything else besides these 3 things. So based on our markings, we've got a side, included angle, and a side. So these 2 triangles can be congruent by using side, angle, side. And then lastly, let's look at this third example here. These arrows do not mean the sides are parallel. So I cannot use that as a side. That does not count. Parallel just means they never intersect. Doesn't mean they're the same length. But because they are parallel, that does let me say that my alternate interior angles are congruent. So I've got a pair of alternate interior angles here. So we are allowed to use alternate interior angles. So we can mark those on our figure. So that counts as an angle. This one is congruent to this one, and this one is congruent to this one. And then again, we have that shared side, same thing up here. So this does count as a side. So again, we've got a side in between 2 angles. So this one would be angle, side, angle. Please make sure you know these 4 theorems. Okay, if you see any other theorem that you think might work, but it's not one of these 4, it does not count. You're only allowed to use these 4. The other thing I want to look at before we go into some examples is the actual format of a 2-column proof. So you've got your statements on the left, reasons on the right. Now, please understand this is not a formal proof. This does not make any sense. These don't go together. I'm just trying to give you examples. So on your statement side, you're going to have things like 2 sides are congruent to each other, 2 angles are congruent to each other, or 2 triangles that are congruent to each other. You may have some other things, but for the most part, you're going to have your congruency statements from your triangles in the left-hand column. On your right-hand column under the reason side, that's where you're going to have your explanation. So all of these things we were talking about over here, vertical angles, alternate interior angles, reflexive property, that counts as a reason because that explains or justifies why you made a marking. You will also have reasons for given if it's given to you. And then you will also have your triangle congruency statement. So SSS, SAS, all of those will prove your triangle's congruent. So now time for some examples. So again, if you would like to work on these, I would encourage you to pause the video and try these on your own and then play the video and see if you got them correct. So taking a look at A, just to walk through this, the first statement says RS is congruent to UT. So I need to go up to my figure and find those segments. So RS is located right here and UT is located right here. Both of those segments have tick marks on them, so they're congruent, and that is given to us. I didn't have to do any thinking or guessing or measuring. It was marked. That counts as given information. My second reason is also given, so I need to come up to my figure and see what else I'm given, and that's going to be these sides with one tick mark on them. So TR is going to be congruent to US. They're going to be the exact same length because they both have one tick mark. Again, keep in mind we always need 3 pieces of information when proving triangle congruency. So again, the statements that we have, all of them have 3 pieces, 3 letters long. So even though we're given those 2 things, in order to prove these 2 triangles congruent, we do have to have at least one other thing. So looking at statement 3, TS is congruent to TS. That's the shared side. Anytime you see the same side congruent to its